Repel the Space Invaders. Take missile command. Face the asteroids. I've got to save the Earth.
Can you dig it, gamers? The 70s just keep on trucking. These are the video game years, and welcome to 1978.
Hot diggity damn, it's 1978.
An incredible year that sent kids to the local arcade as video games went global.
Before video games were only in the United States.
1978 introduced new influences like Invaders from space and Japan.
That becomes a national phenomenon.
Magnavox tries again.
Available now for Odyssey, programmed by you.
The world gets a new controller.
I love playing games with the trackball. They give you a really precise amount of control.
Plus the Pong paddle strikes back. And Simon demands your attention.
Push green, push red, push yellow, push blue. Push till you're blue in the face.
So book it to your nearest toy store, Jack, because these are the video game years, and this is 1978.
We especially like Space Invaders, zapping those little devils from outer space. It's fun, but personally I think the whole idea of creatures from outer space is a little far-fetched.
Most influential game of all time, Space Invaders, bar none. There is no contest whatsoever.
Man, I love Space Invaders so much, I even went out and bought a shirt. Look at this.
It's not Space Invaders, it's Galaxian. What's the matter with you?
Japan created something that was going to take the world by storm in Space Invaders.
Before this point, Japan had no influence over the video game industry. I mean, it was Atari and that was it.
It went global before video games were only in the United States, and after Space Invaders, it was everywhere. It was international.
You have to realize that World War II just ended like a little over 3 decades earlier, and Japan was still coming through this economic miracle.
Oh, Japan, you so crazy.
Americans were pretty stuck on thinking stuff from Japan was still kind of crappy.
Japan was at its infancy with, as far as being a chip supplier. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of weird that you see a Japanese company using American-made products for its machines.
Doc is like, well, no wonder the circuit failed. It was made in Japan. And then Marty's like, what do you mean, Doc? All the best stuff's made in Japan.
All of a sudden, Taito shows up with Space Invaders, and that becomes a national phenomenon.
Space Invaders was developed by one man. He did the programming, he did the art, he even made the hardware.
Taito.
Taito had its first international success. It wasn't super blockbuster, but their first success with Gunfight.
Midway got the license for Space Invaders, and they got a huge hit.
Amazing hit. It was released in arcades in America late '78 and around the middle of the year in Japan.
Midway had their own version, Taito, who released the game, and Japan had their own version. And there's, not only was there physical differences, but the Japanese version actually had a joystick, whereas the American version had only buttons, which was kind of neat.
The cool backlit with the moon on the bottom. Yeah, some of the versions had that. I like some of the cocktail versions had the the cellophane overlays that gave you the different colors. It was they used what they could at the time. Yeah.
I guess it's considered an early shooter, but your guy is a tank.
It's a tank. It's a cannon of some sort.
It's like you're a tank, but fighting aliens.
Yeah, you're not even a spaceship. You're behind a little bunker.
It's a game that has no ending. It keeps going. Waves and waves of more attackers. It gets harder and harder. It's one of those games that when you first play, almost anyone can get past the first level, but second, third, fourth, it gets tough.
You're like at the bottom, and you got like these little bases like above you, just a little bit above you, and you gotta hide behind them.
You're shooting little pellets at the Space Invaders.
Pellets at aliens doing line dancing.
There is a defined line that you have to defend. Yes. It's Earth. If you lose, no one will ever know what a chocolate malt tastes like ever again.
Yeah.
You screwed up. You're the last line of defense. And
well, those and those green blobby shields that really just got in your way most of the time.
What were those made out of? Algae?
I don't know.
Amount of enemies they had on the screen took up so much processing power for the game that as you destroy the enemies, obviously, if you've ever played the game, you realize the enemies speed up as you destroy more of them.
It really makes your heart start beating. The beads of sweat, you know, kind of gather on your forehead and whatnot, and it's very, very traumatizing.
That's a bug, not a feature, because the processor can handle things faster as more and more enemies are destroyed.
There is such an impending sense of dread when you play Space Invaders, and I am terribly stressed at all times. I think what really does it is
The sound in Space Invaders was panic attack inducing.
Early version of the two-step.
Yeah. It's like Achy Breaky Heart, except it's except the Space Invaders, they're invading.
Yes. Bum, 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 bum.
And then you get locked into a zone and you're shooting, and then that UFO sound comes out.
You're like, oh my god! And then you get bonus points if you hit it.
Right. Space Invaders was kind of a pioneer for the arcade because this was the game that introduced the high score.
Basically what it was, it started bragging rights in games.
Space Invaders brought that challenge, like, I've got to beat his high score. I've got to beat his high score.
Competition. Dudes are competitive. That's it, period. You know, there was lines wrapped around the block. You know, next person throws his quarter up.
It made people come back to play the game.
And now when I get my high score and it's always better than yours, I have Space Invaders to thank.
And so you want to play against your friends or anyone you know locally and go for the high scores.
I'm better than you at everything, including arts and crafts, and you know it.
So you're pumping quarters in. So that's one of the reasons why in Japan, there was actually a coin shortage.
Reportedly, there was a shortage of 100 yen coins, which is what the machines took.
And Japan just ran out of them. Like, how does that even happen?
The Japanese mint had to manufacture extra 100 yen coins.
Here's an idea. Tokens.
Supposedly the same kind of thing happened after the game was released in America with quarters, but you know, some of this stuff back in the dark ages of the 70s, you could never confirm.
Space Invaders was such a phenomenon that some stores in Japan got rid of their stock of vegetables and whatever else they were selling to turn their stores into Space Invaders stores. That'd be like Hallmark throwing out all their cards to make their store like a Angry Birds store.
Arcades were throwing, game rooms were throwing pachinko machines out to make room for Space Invaders.
Even a lot of the companies that we know nowadays make video games, like Nintendo and Taito, well, they were producing pachinko machines.
Or as we call it in America on The Price is Right, Plinko.
What's pachinko, you ask?
Now, pachinko is like a vertical pinball game where you basically you flick a metal ball, which ding 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 and falls down through a bunch of shit.
Kind of a simple game, actually. You have these small little silver marbles. You basically just flip the little flipper, the marbles go down, and if you land in here, you win more marbles. It's like gambling, but not with money.
But you could win basically tokens that you could exchange for things that you could sell for money.
I'll never replace you for Space Invaders.
A lot of people credit the dominance of the Atari 2600 to Space Invaders when it was released on the console in 1980.
Parents hook it up to the TV.
Those are supposed to be the Space Invaders you get with your missiles.
Wow!
That's it, Uncle Frank. You saved our planet.
Yeah, this time.
The first home console game you had to have because it was the first arcade hit you had to play.
And so there was a ton of different options in this. So there was one where you basically can have it where your shields like wiggle back and forth. Right, wiggle, 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 yeah. Yeah, the aliens fire would wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. There's a lot of wiggle, wiggle, wiggle in this. There was a lot of wiggle, wiggle, wiggle in 1978. Oh yeah, there was.
It gave Atari a pretty good advantage because if you had a choice between other systems like the Odyssey 2 or the APF, you had to go for the Atari. You had to get Space Invaders. You had to do it.
The greatest scourge caused by Space Invaders wasn't the Japanese shop owners abandoning their goods or the depletion of the 100 yen coin. It was that craptastic pop song, Space Invaders.
You had a music video for it, and you had some weird robot guys walking around like androids with like glowing eyes. It had nothing to do with Space Invaders, really.
Astrocade, the professional video game system that gives you 4-player capability, 3 built-in games, a calculator, and these new cartridges. Creative Crayon. Even the young can make beautiful pictures. The Incredible Wizard has a dungeon of surprises for you. You can even create your own games with Astrocade Basic, the easy computer teaching cartridge. Astrocade, the home entertainment sensation that's a personal computer too.
January 1978. A new competitor arrives.
Step right up, come one, come all. Be amazed by the Bally Professional Arcade.
You mean the video system that came out where it was very limited and was very buggy and people had to return it because it didn't work?
That's the one.
Hey, you gotta play with the big boys? You gotta, you gotta put up with that, and you gotta be prepared,
And they couldn't handle any of the problems that they were having with the initial batch of systems, so they really found themselves kind of like killing themselves in a way.
As with many new systems, there are often defects and returns that plague early adopters. However, Bally was new to the home console market, so they didn't really know how to deal with the logistics. I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore nowadays. Red Ring of Death.
Xbox 360. Xbox.
You could order it in 1977 in catalogs and so forth, but it turns out they weren't quite ready to push the thing out the door, so they had to wait till 78.
Hey son, guess what I'm getting you for Christmas? What, Dad? The Bally Home Entertainment Arcade System.
Oh boy!
Oh really?
Yeah.
I can't wait to open that on Christmas Day. Oh, wait a minute, Junior. It's not gonna be here till January. Oh.
And they were an amusement company. They weren't a retail company. So they were not very familiar with what was required behind making a retail product.
They've done a lot of things in the life of the company. From 1930s when they first started making slot machines, to the 40s they made parts for World War II, the 50s they started doing coffee vending machines, and they also had a short-lived music label company. And it's no surprise, somewhere down the line they purchased Midway Games to get into the video game market.
Bally and Midway had an arcade business.
Eventually it was Bally and then merged with Midway and became Bally Midway.
Didn't sell a huge amount. It wasn't sold in a lot of stores, only computer stores, not regular retail stores, so that really hurt it.
And I wouldn't exactly call Bally's console here a success. I mean, it stuck around for a few more years and had some name changes.
And if you're still hungry for excitement, how about the Munchie game? Astro Arcade, the home entertainment sensation that's a personal computer too.
It's the professional system. Right. Well, until we changed the name to Astrocade, which makes no sense a few years later.
I mean, they changed the name like 4 times. Okay. Game Strategy, you want to know about it. He probably has every version.
So this is the home library computer, the Bally Home Library Computer. This is only available, this version was only available through mail order and only sold in New York City area.
When I was a kid, anytime I did a mail order for something, it ended up being crap. Amazing live sea monkeys my foot.
But by 1978, what they decided to do was they decided to rename it the Bally Professional Arcade and market it in stores, in retail stores.
But the only stores you could buy it in were computer stores. Because again, they didn't know what you needed to do as a retail company.
But they were missing out on the most important market, kids. There's no force greater than kids screaming in the middle of a department store, I want it!
I mean, why would little junior son of a bitch be in a computer store?
The hardware on this thing was actually pretty impressive.
Literally the best home system on the market.
Yeah, it was better than the VCS, which came out the year before. It was top of the line when it came out.
Bally supported 4 players, up to 4. It came with 2 controllers only, but you can buy an extra 2. 4-player action in the late 70s? That was unheard of.
The Bally Astrocade has some of the best controllers for any vintage system out there. Here's the Bally Astrocade controller. As you can see, almost looks like a handgun, a handle. This is your trigger button right here, your action button. And then your left hand, this is the knob up top, you can turn around and twist. You actually move it around like a directional pad. Really advanced for a system that came out in the late 70s.
When you listen to the Bally machine, it actually sounds like sound effects that you would hear in an arcade.
It had the best colors, the best sound. It had arcade sound.
When you're comparing this to arcade ports that were on the VCS at the time, it's steps above.
Yeah. And it even came with a version of BASIC. It was based off of Tiny Basic.
It's still within the realm where computers and video game systems are blurred, so they're trying to put, productivity applications on certain things, thinking that, when the kid's done playing the game, maybe dad can use it to balance the ledger.
It was marketed as more than just a kid's toy.
Well, on the front of the console, there were some numbers and keys.
And in order to program anything like the alphanumerics or the commands, each key had 4 possible commands, and you had to hit a certain shift. There were like 3 shift buttons that were colored.
It was more expensive. It was $100 more expensive than the Atari VCS or even the Odyssey 2. It was a $300 system in 1978.
$270, I think I saw once in an old Montgomery Ward catalog, which inflation adjusted is $960.
When the Sega CD came out, it was $300, and that was prohibitively expensive, and that was like 20 years later.
That's why they probably call it professional system. They want to differentiate from the Atari and say this is like the big one.
The Bally Professional Arcade was essentially the Neo Geo of the time.
Initially, when Bally released the home library computer, they had envisioned it not to only be a home computer system for the home market, but they were going to have stand-up arcade machines as well with the Astrocade or home library computer running the arcade.
There wasn't a huge amount of games in the Bally library. There's only a few dozen, so that also was not good for it. And there wasn't a lot of ports. There was a Wizard of War port, however. That was pretty good.
Yes.
It sounded very authentic to the arcade. Not exactly, you couldn't pull up exactly, but pretty close for, 78.
If you wanted to replicate the arcade experience at home, even though there were only about 50 games that eventually came out for the thing, the Bally Professional Arcade was the way to go.
I don't have a huge amount of experience with it, but I respect the Bally Professional / Astrocade.
And now, Pat Contri presents the pop culture of 1978 that inspired gaming.
Pat here with the 1978 pop culture moments that inspired video games.
This year, Superman brings you the gift of flight.
Superman, the movie, starring Christopher Reeve. A near-perfect superhero movie, with the exception of that creepy "Can you read my mind" scene with Margot Kidder. Ugh.
And an animated Star Wars story on the Star Wars Holiday Special.
The Star Wars Holiday Special. Trippy Jefferson Airplane music video. Wookiees yelling at each other for a half hour. B. Arthur. But we got a glimpse of Boba Fett for the first time.
Come back soon. I'll be waiting.
And now, when David Banner grows angry or outraged, a startling metamorphosis occurs.
The Incredible Hulk TV show. See Bill Bixby get his ass kicked for almost an hour before he hulks up and throws 2x4s at bad guys. Battlestar Galactica. Sure, it was mostly a Star Wars ripoff, but it was fun, and there wasn't any B. Arthur. And that was the pop culture of 1978 that inspired video games. Remember, there's other things in the world besides video games. They're just less important.
You win. Odyssey. Video game fun. Computer keyboard challenge. The entrance to an alternate world of fire-breathing dragons. Hard-hitting sluggers. Arcade wizards. More than 40 games in all. Odyssey. The excitement of a game. The mind of a computer. All for the price of an ordinary video game. Odyssey.
Magnavox is back. And they're serious.
So Magnavox introduces the Odyssey 2. Even though there were like
24 other Odysseys.
50 Odysseys.
7,000 Odyssey Pong systems in the 70s.
I don't know, it probably actually would have been confusing even more if they just called it the Odyssey 25.
They probably just wanted to change their image after their poor early marketing that suggested that their system would only work on a Magnavox brand television. It's a cover-up conspiracy.
So the Odyssey 2, At first, you wouldn't know where that name came from, but remember that little system that came out in '72?
Which was when the original Odyssey came out, the first video game console.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Odyssey 1.
And Ralph Baer, the father of home video games.
But what came out in 1978 was not the Odyssey 1. It was the Odyssey 2.
The Odyssey 2!
Magnavox is sitting at home. They're like, what the hell, Atari VCS? We're the guys that came up with this. Right. We have the Odyssey from, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We're getting back into this.
The Odyssey 2 was priced about the same as the VCS, but it had a slight advantage over it. There was an educational aspect to the Odyssey 2 that parents liked.
Versus the Atari 2600, which was so obviously just games.
There's even the, computer intro cartridge, which teaches you how to talk in a low-level way, like very simply, in assembly.
I can teach my kids, and they'll be less stupider, and I apparently did not have an Odyssey 2.
So you have one console that's only games, or one that's games and educational.
Given the option, Atari, Magnavox, they went with the Odyssey.
Are we a game? Are we a toy?
The console itself looks like a computer. It had the membrane keyboard so you could actually type in.
It's got a really cool 70s sci-fi look.
And it was like a pressure-sensitive membrane keyboard so that kids couldn't destroy it.
You can't break anything off, and if you get sticky fingers or chip dust on there, you can actually, instead of using compressed air, you can just wipe this off.
Yeah, it's pressure-sensitive. It's brilliant.
You can spill juice on here, and it'll probably be okay.
I throw juice on it all the time. Young kids wouldn't break out the keys.
I find these infinitely fascinating. And it's got a big, shiny red button.
And the controllers themselves were kind of like an Atari 2600 joystick where you had your stick and your primary button.
Action button. It says action.
Action.
They weren't always hardwired in, but in later models they were. But it had 2 built in.
It doesn't perfectly center, but it does have this little kind of restrictor plate molded into the plastic. So you couldn't do 360 degrees of contact on this thing.
When you flip it over and you look at it, you can actually open this up like a mouse and clean out the entire joystick and do maintenance on it yourself. Sony won't even let you change the rechargeable battery on a PS3 controller.
They had come out with the voice module, which was really, really fun. Like those typical, when you see 80s stuff now, or 70s stuff even, where they're doing voice emulation, it's always like this.
First console to have voice synthesis.
Back then, when a game talked to you, you could pretty much get rid of your friends.
And synthesis is huge because it's the first step to actual music in games.
So you had these cartridges that were on little handles, so they tried to make that look different.
Ergonomic carts with handles. They didn't want us to get metacarpal.
At the time, Atari still didn't have the big arcade games available.
They were doing a lot of different things to get, try to capture some part of the market. It worked.
The Magnavox Odyssey 2 was a big competitor.
People did buy the Odyssey 2. Not as much as the 2600, but there was a hardcore following.
It sold 2 million units, which is respectable, but not stripper and jumpsuit worthy numbers.
Magnavox introduced to the home market not only educational games with the keyboard, but also logic games, puzzle games, and sports games. They were the first home console to have actual sports titles.
Thanks a lot, Odyssey.
You're welcome, Madden fans.
That's why Atari later on decided to do more sports games, more learning games for their market as well.
And probably the most infamous, but still a good game on the Odyssey 2, Casey Munchkin.
Casey Munchkin, that's all I gotta say is Casey Munchkin.
It's the killer app for the Odyssey 2.
The killer app.
And when you're hungry to step up the challenge, punch! Odyssey's computer keyboard lets you program a myriad of mazes all your own. Nobody else's maze game does that. Casey Munchkin, available now. Programmed by you.
Casey Munchkin is essentially a Pac-Man clone, and Atari had sued Magnavox because it was so similar.
But there were some good games in there. Pickaxe Pete.
A delightful Donkey Kong-esque game where you mine for gold until you succumb to the Black Lung.
You had Power Lords based on that show, the old show. Quest for the Rings, which incorporated using a layout over the keyboard.
I really like these master strategy video games or the Odyssey 2. There's several of them out there. These are 2 of them. You get Quest for the Rings and Conquest of the World. It basically has a map and it's a board game, but you have to use Odyssey 2 in order to play it as well.
Basically a board game and video game hybrid. So you would put this overlay on the keyboard, and then you had a game board and you had pieces. They had actual metal pieces inside of there. And that was kind of cool because you would move around the board, and then when you got to a certain point, you would have to play the video game to see how that resolved.
And you had some other cool ones. You had, they had their own Space Invaders clone, Alien Invaders Plus. And what? Invaders from hyperspace.
It's got this, like, rainbow text where each line is a slightly different color than the last. And it makes it really trippy because it's not just a journey while you're reading this, but it's an odyssey.
It took over the world. President of the United States for a few years there was the Odyssey 2.
I mean, this is the 70s. You can't make rainbow font like that easily. I mean, not everyone has Photoshop or Word.
No. Hence, the Odyssey 2.
Well done, player. Uh-oh.
Power up. The introduction of Atari Football, Taito Soccer, but the controller used on the arcade cabinet?
Oh, the trackball. Who doesn't love the trackball?
The trackball. Woo! Don't we all love the trackball?
Trackball came out in 1978 and began my love-hate relationship with the video game Missile Command. I hate that game.
I love trackballs. I love playing games with a trackball. They give you a really precise amount of control.
How fast you go, how slow you go, and it was really innovative for the time.
I don't like them, honestly. I think they're kind of gimmicky and stupid.
Basically a pool cue ball that sticks out of the top of the control panel. You gotta slap it around to control the game.
It's always messed up. It's never right. It's like it's either stuck or sticky, or someone's broken it by just
trying to get the dang thing going fast.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how most of them probably broke. The knuckleheads like you.
Knuckleheads like me going.
Yeah.
Oh, stop that momentum. Good.
If you roll your hand too far to the side where it connects with the panel, you're gonna pinch the hell out of your fingers.
You don't get blisters on your thumbs anymore. You get them all over your freaking hand.
I remember coming home from the arcade with blisters and purple and black, and those were the days.
And that's why all video game consoles have controllers now that look like this.
I used to play the trackball with my tongue.
Is that what's wrong with you?
I'm like, I gotta go down. And
well, it was innovative.
Yeah.
But Atari Football is X's and O's on one side. You pick your play, and I do believe you move one of your players with the trackball.
Other than Space Invaders in 1978, it was Atari Football that was the big game in the arcade.
This is really the first arcade football game, especially when football season came around. It was very popular, so people pumping quarters in, and it's multiplayer.
It's the first realistic sports game, in my opinion.
But the funny thing was, as soon as football season was over and people stopped watching it because of that, they also stopped caring about the football video game.
It was the Madden of 1978. It's like, it's a really big deal and you're gonna drop $60 on it, and then later it's gonna cost $3 at GameStop.
Yes, the game kind of died, and Space Invaders kept going.
Luckily, sports fans had the Winter Olympics to fall back on. I'm just kidding.
When they were developing it, they had the whole football field, and so the characters were really small. So what they had to do was they started developing scrolling technology.
The first was in '77 called Superbug, but the technology was originally developed for the Atari Football back in, I think, like '73.
It wasn't until 4 years later that Atari Football was finally released with the scrolling.
In Atari's Football, you didn't pay for lives. You paid for 90 seconds of game time.
You actually just paid for extra time. You got another 90 seconds of gameplay.
Kind of like Nintendo's Play Choice 10 or the early demo games at Sears. It's like a pixelated peep show.
You're now faced with this issue playing games where it doesn't matter necessarily how good you are to continue. It's time no matter what.
90 seconds of playtime with just 1 quarter? That's just ridiculous. I mean, what can you do in 90 seconds?
I can't even jump in 90 seconds. Yeah, maybe I could.
What a block tease.
I remember as a kid playing Centipede with the trackball, and I hate the trackball.
I love the trackball. This is where we differ here.
You had great controls for Centipede, Millipede, and my personal favorite trackball game, Missile Command. Trackball! Yay!
Marble Madness, which was a perfect fit for a trackball. You were a marble ball, and obviously you just move the trackball like you would a normal marble ball.
But there are a few games where it's kind of fun.
Around the 2000s was The Grid, which had a joystick and the trackball for shooting.
Now, if you're playing soccer,
Sullied by Golden Tee, which is in every bar.
Yeah.
That and like Buck Hunter.
Thank you, Atari. Trackball!
Trackball sucks. Don't ever use a trackball.
Much appreciation to Atari and their Atari football for inventing the trackball.
And I do not salute you. Good day.
Next level. Rue presents the gaming innovations of 1978.
Oh, hello. This is Rue for the Video Game Innovations of 1978. What new technology graced the face of video gaming and changed it forever? We have Speed Freak, the first driving video game that had a first-person POV, and some pretty cool vector graphics too. We had Frogs, the first game with a jumping character. And we had the first MUD, or multi-user dungeon, which was created by Roy Trubshaw at the University of Essex in the UK. This is basically the first way that multiple people could network in and play the same game happening at the same time, and was the precursor to massively multiplayer online games. That does it for the innovations of 1978. I'll see you next year, and don't forget, it's not just nostalgia, it's science.
Power up. Did you try Breakout with a moving wall? Did you try Breakout with an extra ball? It's what fun's all about. It's Super Breakout.
Super Breakout is actually on a microprocessor. Now this is cool for a couple of reasons. One, it's emulatable. You can play a version of Super Breakout just like you would have played in the arcades in '78. But two, it gave them the ability to do more with it.
Like Breakout 1. Except what, a few more game modes?
You're not just breaking bricks anymore with Super Breakout.
I mean, they added some more options, that was nice. It's still playing Pong with yourself.
Should I do the Pong variations joke again?
Cavity, which introduced the multiple balls on the playing field.
Breakout 2.
Progressive, where every few paddle bounces, the bricks would get lower and lower and lower. Similar in style to, say, something like a modern puzzle game like Puzzle Bobble.
Super Breakout was an updated version of Breakout. The end.
Wasn't the commercial for that like some dude trying to break out of prison or something? You really have to use your imagination with that.
It's the anti-Space Invaders.
Oh, sorry.
In '76, you had Breakout released. Atari released Breakout.
It was a big game. Yeah, because, especially in the late 70s, you had Pong clones, you had space shooters, and Breakout style games was something different.
In '76, you had Al Alcorn as project manager for Breakout, and one of the people working under him was Steve Jobs.
It's interesting that Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs worked on Breakout.
Steve Jobs, you might have heard of. He was the founder of Microsoft.
Pretty colors, bouncing ball, paddle, simple concept.
Brick bashing.
He was tasked with creating a prototype of the prototype design for the game, which he did.
The original Breakout was what they called a discrete logic game. Everything was done with the chips. What this means is the game is basically a machine.
However, then he was tasked with a further imperative to take out more of these chips, the microchips that controlled the game, because those things be expensive.
you can't really say emulate this on a computer because there's no code for it to interpret. Right.
Atari promised to give him a bonus of $100 for every chip he could take out of the design. So after 4 straight days of work, Wozniak delivered, taking out 50 chips from the original design, and Mr. Jobs pocketed that and gave Mr. Wozniak half of his original sum of payment, $700 into $375. So yeah, there was that.
Jobs kind of stiffed Wozniak on the bonus for making it happen.
Bad.
Wozniak's work on Breakout did inspire him in his design of the Apple II.
And inspired their motives when writing their programming language for the Apple around being able to, create games similar to Breakout on it.
Came from Super Breakout.
Yeah.
Programming code.
His version of BASIC, the basic programming language, Integer BASIC, which he put on there, definitely inspired, in turn, a lot of people to create their own games.
I wish things that were called basic were actually basic. I mean, I nearly flunked out of high school because I took a programming class my senior year. That's actually not a joke.
So basically what we're trying to say here is that you can trace all of Apple's success back to Breakout.
Apple II for life.
Be sure to download the RetroWare TV app from the Apple App Store.
Wink!
The legacy of Breakout and Super Breakout, you have games like, of course, the big one, Arkanoid, could be the best one of the whole lot.
Breakout wound up innovating Japanese game development too. And we all know how that turned out. David Hasselhoff.
You have Thunder and Lightning, which 4 people have played.
Real gangsters programming assembly. What?
Breakout. Good hit for Atari.
Good stuff. Still good stuff.
Insert coin.
Do you know anything about the APF M1000?
You know what point you can say you officially have a problem as a video game collector? When you own an APF MP1000.
It may very well be the very first 8-bit console. And we should say nothing more than that, because I know nothing about the system.
If you can say that no one owned the RCA Studio 2, less than no one owned the APF MP1000.
It's the best system ever.
It's advanced.
Throughout the 70s, APF released a lot of pawn clones, but it wasn't until 1978 that APF released their very first console with interchangeable games, and that is known as the APF MP1000.
They weren't a huge company. They weren't Atari. They certainly weren't Magnavox. So when you put out a game console back then, it's almost like a crapshoot, because this is the first generation of game consoles. There's no one to copy off of.
A really rare system, hard to find, but they had an attachment to it as well called the Imagination Station that would turn the system into a full-fledged computer, which is really cool for late 70s.
Which
was a computer.
Is very cool, and it let you code games for the MP1000. I have to be honest with you, if I was of age at the time to be into games, I would actually want that, but you would have to do that at the same time and enticement. You can't release a system with very little library and then release a really cool add-on a year or 2 years later and expect it to sell the system that didn't sell in the first place.
Very short-lived, unfortunately, but did live on a little bit into the late 80s through Emerson.
The game library was so generic. Games like Backgammon,
Breakdown,
Blackjack,
Shooting Gallery, and Pinball/Dungeon Hunt, which would have been way more exciting as Pinball Dungeon Hunt.
And again, I don't want to bash this system, but when you have a company come out with a system, you need a game that's going to, at least a couple of games, wow, I want to own that.
When Emerson released the Arcadia 2001 system, they actually recycled a lot of their cartridges, and so the cartridges are interchangeable. They don't play on each system, but at least they're the same cartridge itself.
They gave it their all. You have a fire button on the controller. The controllers are not that well put together.
But at least the fire button is lefty friendly.
It is lefty friendly. You have buttons on here. I don't know why I have this. I really don't.
And even the Arcadia 2001 system itself was very similar to the APF MP1000.
This is probably the last time a lot of you watching this will ever see one of these, so take a good look at the MP1000.
Pixel Dan presents the other toys of 1978.
Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan, and this is the other toys of 1978.
You can stage make-believe battles against a Croyer. Like all Micronauts, a Croyer has interchangeable parts.
Micronauts were action figures that followed that same science fiction theme, but had the gimmick of interchangeability.
Playing Hungry, Hungry Hippos! Hungry, Hungry Hippos!
Hungry, Hungry Hippos! Come on, who didn't have this board game while growing up? The object of the game was to feed your hippos and collect the most marbles.
Hungry, Hungry Hippos, new from Hasbro.
Once a child wants to spell, the spell is cast. Speak and Spell from Texas Instruments. That is correct.
And then there was the learning machine, the Speak and Spell. A, B, C. Yeah, you know, that thing that E.T. played with in the 80s. Yeah, that.
The Learning Center of Texas Instruments.
So there you go, guys. That's the other toys of 1978. Remember, video games aren't the only cool toys out there.
Round and round go the lights and the sounds. Simon picks up speed as he goes. Simon goes faster by leaps and by bounds. Simon wins by a nose. Push green, push red, push yellow, push blue. Push till you're blue in the face.
The Christmas season of 1978. And guess what the #1 selling toy of 78 is?
I know.
What is it, John?
Simon!
Simon.
So in 1978, Milton Bradley released Simon.
So Ralph Baer is a god.
Ralph Baer takes Atari's game Touch Me from 1974 and makes his own little handheld game called Simon.
Touch Me.
Ralph Baer kinda ripped off Atari for the concept of Simon.
The great irony is that in the early 70s, Nolan Bushnell visited an expo and a demonstration of Ralph Baer's brown box,
which later became the Odyssey.
His brown box was ripped off by Atari for Pong.
which then made Atari a gigantic hit.
Right. It led to the 2600, etc.
Yeah, Atari's huge. And then years later, Ralph Baer sees Atari's game Touch Me and then improves upon that and creates Simon.
Revenge.
All's fair in love and video games, I guess.
Simon is a computer-controlled game.
Yes, with 5 different ways of playing. 5.
It would spit out a pattern of colors and blips, and you had to match it. And obviously, the more you went on, the more difficult it became.
It's 4 big, bright, colorful buttons.
Red, blue, green, red. You guys know what I'm talking about.
What if I don't want to push the red button?
This is easy.
Your move, Simon.
It entertained me for like a millisecond, and I was off to throwing dirt at my sister.
The fact that you have big candy buttons that you slam with your whole hand, that makes all the difference.
Red. Red, green.
Red, green.
Son of a bitch. And that's why everyone hates Simon.
Simon! God, Simon is still great.
It would be a big event on the schoolyard with everyone gathered around. It was in a challenge. Here comes Johnny Simon to play it.
You know, Simon actually made his first appearance at Studio 54 of all places.
The place where I used to get my groove on.
Simon, disco lights, Simon, lit floor panels. I get it.
I can just imagine Cher and Mick Jagger cutting up lines of coke on it.
Yet celebrities pushing Simon. I don't know why.
And you want to play Simon?
And it became ubiquitous. Well, not only just Simon, but the clones, many clones that came out with it.
That same year, because it was so successful, a whole series of clone versions of Simon came out as well.
Parker Brothers released a version called Merlin.
Merlin had multiple games, but Merlin also had a Simon Says kind of game as well.
Tiger Electronics released a version called Copycat.
Copycat, huh? How fitting, you ripoff.
And then Atari actually released their own handheld version of Touch Me.
Simon was released in 78, and they're still making, to this date, 2012, versions of Simon.
They sell the big one, they sell smaller ones because they don't need to have like weird 15-volt systems or whatever the freak they were.
That's really showing the longevity of this product, and that's a sign of its success as well.
Simon was a ploy.
Oh God, here we go.
Simon was a ploy.
Red, green, yellow, blue, yellow. Yellow.
There's gonna be a time when that signal's gonna go off and the children of the corn will rise again.
High score.
From what we understand, when Warner Communications bought Atari, there was a 7-year non-competition clause that you had to sign. That 7 years is up, if I'm correct, this year, in October of this year. 1st, 10 o'clock.
Well, with the video game crash, Atari was looking really, really, really bad right now.
By 1978, Warner Communications had purchased Atari.
Warner Communications buying Atari was a big change in the culture at Atari.
Oh, let's make some games. Let's make profit now.
For the first time in the history of video games as an industry, it had now become corporate.
That's where it all started, back in the 70s.
The party was coming to an end. It was like the end of a Fish concert. Hippies and drugs, gotta go.
After the purchase, Bushnell was kept on as CEO, but the company was actually hurting pretty bad from their low Christmas sales back in '77.
I mean, the 1977 Christmas sales were horrible. Is this boring you?
It was a result of shipping problems that prevented Atari from getting all their stock on shelves in time for Christmas.
There wasn't really any good games in the system yet. You had a glut of handhelds.
The other problem was that there were too many similar products available. It's kind of like the confused grandparents setting out to buy their kids Transformers, but then they see GoBots, and they're like, forget it, we'll just get them rocking horses.
Bushnell would have differences of opinion on certain things.
His relationship with some of the more corporate aspects of the new ownership didn't really meld.
And so he was, for all intents and purposes, fired from the company.
He was fired on his own accord, and he was kept from working in the video game industry for many years afterwards.
The Odyssey 2 came out with a keyboard and was billed as more than just a video game system. It's an education system, and your kids will be smarter and they'll be able to beat the Russians in boxing and go into the moon and stuff.
Atari sees Odyssey with their fancy keyboard and their happy soccer moms with their educational software and thinks, yep, that's for us.
Things with keyboards were thought of as for the more intelligent children.
So to combat the Odyssey, Atari released their own version of the keyboard, but it was a little ill-fated.
Despite that, they did release some pretty interesting titles. Let me look at what those were.
Atari started releasing sports games to combat the Odyssey 2, and one of them was basketball. First time a 3D-ish perspective was used in a video game, and there was no comparison. The Odyssey version of basketball looked like balls, and the Atari VCS version looked less like balls.
So there was no real reason to go and jump and get the system. They tried. They did a port of Space War.
The very first vector graphics arcade game. But they called it Space War, and there was a space between space and war, unlike the original game that was simply called Space War.
Warner, which actually did really well.
Because of Space Invaders, they were actually able to sell 500,000 stockpiled VCS machines for Christmas of '78.
And eventually made the Atari 2600 the biggest video game console of the late 70s, early 80s, until they inadvertently caused the crash of '83. But don't get ahead of me.
Leonardo DiCaprio actually owns the movie rights to the story. He has the biopic in production, and he's had it in pre-production for the last few years. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine anyone better than Leonardo DiCaprio to play Nolan Bushnell?
No, I can't.